Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. Just a moment, you'll hear from Daniel Gallen, who's still making his way back from Los Angeles, where he was covering USC. Last time we caught up with him on the show, he was in the LA Coliseum, bringing us post-game coverage after hearing from a bunch of players after Penn State's 33-30 victory over USC. If you missed that, we got about 40 minutes of post-game content that dropped on Saturday evening. We will hear from Tyler Calvaruso a little later in this episode because Penn State completed the commitment flip of Josh Johnson, a defensive back who had spent time committed to Louisville, recently visited Happy Valley, and now is a member of the 2025 Penn State recruiting class. We got a few other recruiting notes to get to with Tyler as well. Just to give you a lay of the land here on the second bye week of Penn State's 2024 season. If you notice, we didn't have a Monday episode up. Normally we have a James Franklin press conference on Mondays. That's not on the schedule this week. The media schedule a little bit different. We're going to be on practice field Tuesday evening versus Wednesday evening. We're going to get a chance to hear from both Penn State coordinators on Wednesday afternoon, Andy Kotelnicki, Tom Allen. We will hear from James Franklin after practice on Tuesday, but that's it. Normally we're going to hear from 6, 7, 8 players over the course of a week. We'll have a couple chances to go over to team facilities, but this week it's condensed. It's a bye week. Penn State's taking advantage of it. We're going to try to take advantage of it. So only 2 episodes coming your way, one today and then another on Thursday. We'll have feedback coming off of the conversations with the coordinators. We'll talk a little bit about where Penn State stands at midseason. And additionally, we hope to bring on a special guest for you on our next episode. More on that coming, but it's always a special time when Daniel Gallen joins us here on the Lions 24/7 podcast. As I said, I was telling Daniel today, getting my wife and kid out the door, seeing my breath, getting them bundled up in jackets. He's dealing with 90-degree temps down in Arizona at the moment. So as I said, taking a little time to make that transition back from new Big Ten country to old Big Ten country. Happy to have you with us again, Daniel.
I know it's quite the transition going from Big Ten country to now I guess I'm in Big 12 country in Phoenix. Everything's shifting around right now. You never know quite exactly where you are, but it's a bye week, a West Coast trip. I don't think I'm the only one taking advantage of a little extra time with the bye week, but it's good to be back talking some Penn State football right now.
Yeah, there's people on the beat who haven't even gotten out of Southern California yet, and for their own reasons. But that's just where it is, taking advantage of that. And Daniel, let's take advantage of some time to review where the Nittany Lions are coming out of this game. We're going to look a little bit big picture toward the end of this segment. They're number 3 in the country right now. There was some big movement in the Big Ten last weekend with Ohio State falling on the road in a thrilling game against Oregon, and just get that general landscape. But first things first, we've had about 2 days now, a little bit less than 48 hours to digest what we witnessed, you in the press box in Los Angeles, me from my couch here in Happy Valley. But I think at the end of the day, there is so much goodwill built up by the Nittany Lions with that victory and at 6-0 and getting to kind of close up shop for a week in some purposes and rest, that it's hard to read anything about this 6-0 squad right now and say, but wait, I've got a major, major concern.
Definitely. And I think that's what you want from your 6-0 team. I don't think there's been a whole lot of smoke and mirrors from Penn State to get to this point. I think it's been pretty straightforward of what they've been doing to win. I think that we know what their offensive formula has been. We saw a different one to win against USC, leaning a little bit more on the air attack than the ground. And that's what you want to see. You want to see a team that knows what its identity is, but has the ability to adjust when it needs to. And I think we've seen that on both sides of the ball. Penn State offensively leaned on the air. Defensively, we've seen some of these slow starts here and there, and a couple cracks that other teams have exploited with some bigger plays and to get into the end zone early. But then you see a defense that will find its footing here or there. So I think that when you talk about USC, that this was one of the teams where we were like, Penn State can't afford a slow start. Penn State can't afford to give up some stuff early, and you turn around, they're down 14-3 early and 20-6 at half, but they work their way back. And that's something that I don't really think we've seen that much before from a Penn State team these past couple of years. So I think that they showed that this isn't the same old Penn State. And moving forward, I think that's something you can really hang your hat on.
Yeah, 20-6 USC in the first half, and then after the first half, Penn State outscores them 27-10 the rest of the way, including Ryan Barker's winning field goal. Penn State staff every Sunday puts out their players of the game, who they picked from all three phases. And Tyler Warren is the guy we're going to get to in a moment. We spent a lot of time on the post-game podcast breaking down his just dominant, unique performance. But Drew Allar was also on that list as a co-offensive player of the week. And I know people were pretty angry that Tyler Warren had to have a label for the Big Ten Offensive Player of the Week. He shared it with Oregon's quarterback, Dylan Gabriel. But I think Penn State fans will wrap their arms around this one a little bit, because Drew Allar, to me, this was his emergence in a moment where we've all been wondering what it would look like. I think all of us, when we try to close our eyes in August or, back last February, whenever we're trying to forecast what this 2024 team is going to look like, you'd squint and you'd say, okay, what does Drew Allar look like when they need a drive in the fourth quarter? And he's got to deliver it. And it's a big moment. And there's a national audience and everyone wants to see what's happening. And we got a real look at that. I know there were some tense moments in the Bowling Green game, maybe coming out of halftime, where they needed to right the ship and get back in front. But this was down 14 at halftime in Los Angeles as the number 4 team in the country. This was down a touchdown with a few minutes left in the fourth quarter, facing multiple 4th and longs and delivering. And so I think we get to the finish line with Drew Allar, and we can talk about his numbers a little bit later, because this was a different kind of performance. But the definitive moment for Drew was that drive, was him responding to some of those ugly interceptions, and ultimately a guy that was exuding passion and give a care throughout this entire game outwardly. There were several moments in this game, whether it was his movement in the pocket to buy himself a little bit extra time, including that 4th down pass to Julian Fleming, or whether it was him kind of barking at the defenders a little bit, or barking at his own teammates, or barking at his own sidelines when they called the timeout and he was like angry. This was him wearing those emotions on his sleeve, playing like it. And this is big boy football in the Big Ten. There's no more baby Drew Allar. He might still have a baby face, but this is certainly not the sophomore version of number 15 that we got to know in 2023.
I caught the fourth quarter rebroadcast on TV yesterday, and there's a couple things that you sort of forget about or that you don't see when you're up in the press box. I think one of the things that stood out to me was after the touchdown where Penn State tied it, I believe it was 20-20. They cut to the sideline and Drew was incredibly animated, just really hyped up, really jacked up about that. I think that we've talked about what we've seen from him in between the lines and how he's responded to different things. But that sort of emotion on the sideline, that was a little bit new. That kind of intensity. I thought that was really interesting. And the one thing that stands out to me about that final drive, I know that we all talk about the 2 4th down completions to Julian Fleming, which were enormous plays. Great to see Fleming bounce back from that first half. But there's the 2nd and 10 play where Tyler Warren just sort of whiffs on a block, lets I think John Humphrey, the cornerback, go straight by, and he really planted Allar. Like, I remember in the moment being like, oh, that was a big hit. But to see that again on TV and to see the replay a couple times, I mean, that was a big shot. And to have it come at that point and to have that, and then that was followed up by where they burn the timeout and Drew is, very angry and to bounce back. And then you have the 4th down completion to Fleming. I mean, I think that sequence, you just sort of saw a little bit of that growth from Drew Allar, and to be able to navigate through there. I think that there was the 3rd down play on that sequence too, where he just sort of threw it long towards Tyler Warren to no one in particular. And you look at his face looking towards the sideline on the TV broadcast again, and it's just totally calm, just ready, next play, keep going. There was really no getting flustered from Drew Allar. And I think it's been really interesting to watch this year. I know that with the interceptions last year, it was, I think, I was of the opinion that it's never good to throw an interception. And I know that people said after that Indiana game where he finally threw that first pick, they were like, oh yeah, he could finally let it loose on that last throw to Keandre Lambert-Smith. It was like, no, that interception was literally at the worst possible moment, and it put them in a situation where they literally had no other choice. But I think that maybe the way that Drew Allar is being coached this year, and just sort of the mindset and that mood around the team again is that when he's thrown these interceptions, it just hasn't felt like the end of the world. And it felt like last year at times, if he threw an interception, it was going to be the end of the world. And I mean, the 2 interceptions that he threw early in the game at USC were both bad, like forcing them into tight windows. I know the Dinkins one, it's a tip ball, weird things happen. But it didn't feel like anything really changed for the offense after those interceptions, where last year it would feel like things would get a little scary, and suddenly it felt like we were pulling back a little bit. So that has been, I think, a marked change, at least from what I've perceived from where I've been watching some of these games.
Absolutely. And was there any time, any moment in those Michigan or Ohio State matchups last year where it felt like Drew Allar was on solid footing and knew that the next play he could go get it? It never felt like that. It felt like he was grasping for help, and it just felt like he wasn't getting it. And now, it's just a different setup. It's a different Drew Allar. We've noted that demeanor since preseason camp. We saw it on display week 1 down in West Virginia. But this was really the proving ground where he had to walk across some coals on Saturday to get where he wanted to get. And again, we'll note that the defense had his back on those 2 interceptions in Penn State territory. If USC takes one of those down and drives and scores a touchdown, this game isn't getting to overtime. Instead, 6 offensive plays collectively run after those 2 interceptions in Penn State territory, 0 total yards gained. They got -2 on one possession, 2 on the other, and 2 field goal attempts, only 6 points off of those. And the 3rd interception, of course, was him trying to give the team a chance to win at the buzzer, throwing it deep, but wasn't able to step into that throw. But 3 interceptions on one afternoon after throwing 3 interceptions on 550 targets. I was reminded a bit of something Jaylen Reed told us a couple of weeks ago. I wrote a story going into the UCLA matchup about this offense having fun, and much of that is the quarterback having fun with Andy Kotelnicki. Reed said the mentality that exists right now within this offensive system is make mistakes at full speed and then make the next play. And last year it felt more like the offense was walking on eggshells, and typified by their quarterback, number 15. Those eggshells are gone now, and he is definitely making his decisions at full speed. Tyler Warren, we'll get back to him now. He was the offensive MVP pick for Penn State staff. And look, 17 catches. No one in history in the FBS at the tight end position has caught more. Only 2 players ever have caught 17 passes to that position, early 80s, late 60s. So this is very rare ground. Over 220 receiving yards. Only Jahan Dotson's performance in 2021 against Maryland tops that in Penn State history. And Warren has now, as we kind of monitor social media, we've thought highly of Tyler Warren. I think we all think more highly of him than we ever have at this point. But Daniel, we've known about, like, there was a potential he could be your number 1 target. When we're looking around for number 1 receivers in August, and who's going to be that guy? Is it Harrison Wallace? Is it Julian Fleming? Well, we were always mentioning it could be Tyler Warren. He could be the top target in this past game. Clearly he is. He's up to 40 catches, far and away the most on this team. He's over 500 receiving yards at midseason. He's blocking his ass off. He's throwing the ball. He's snapping the ball. He's running the ball. And you're starting to actually legitimately see people who aren't connected to our Penn State beat talking about him as a round 1 NFL draft prospect potentially, and as maybe this dark horse. Hey, I know he's not a quarterback, but consider him Heisman Trophy contender. It's been exciting to follow Tyler Warren, who, again, is going to be the last guy that's tooting his own horn, but he's got a whole chorus of people doing it for him right now.
Yeah, I saw a post on X where in some markets Warren has appeared on the Heisman odds. I think he was 100 to 1 in the one screenshot that I saw, but he's on there. People have noticed. I think that you look at what he's done this year in his stats. He already has career highs in receiving in catches and yards, and his yards per reception is also at a career high. So we've seen the production. I think by the time we get to the end of the season, he'll probably have a new career high in touchdown catches. He's at 4. He had 7 last year. And his yards per game went from 32.5 last year to 85.5 this year. It's just a huge jump. And the one other thing I noticed when I was going through writing up some of the stuff yesterday was I know that we joked about Kaytron Allen and his steadiness with the yards per carry, like year after year and game after game. But you look at Warren's yards per catch dating back to 2021, 12.2, 12.3, 12.4, 12.8. Like, he is just steady. He's there. We've seen some of the bigger plays this year. And I think it's really cool that other people are noticing and that he's getting this different attention. I think at this point, it's late Tuesday morning. And so he's been Big Ten Co-Offensive Player of the Week. He was the AP National Player of the Week. And the touchdown pass where he snapped the ball to Bo Prevula and caught it from Drew Allar was the Pop-Tarts crazy good play of the week. So
and it was SportsCenter top 10. It probably has 1 billion views on Twitter right now. I mean, everyone knows about that play. Everyone knows about this performance. And so moving forward, he's got this certified superstar stamp on him moving forward. And he is the least certified superstar personality maybe that I've encountered at Penn State football. And it's kind of a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I mean, the quip is that like all the stuff about like having to share Big Ten Offensive Player of the Week. It's like the person who cares the least about that is definitely Tyler Warren. I mean, it's pretty. I've been around certain players and in the past where they won't talk about themselves and it's all about the team, and sometimes it's like pulling teeth and it feels like really forced when certain people do it. But with Warren, I think you were the one a couple weeks ago who just kind of asked him straight up, like, we already know that you've given a lot of credit to the team for all of this stuff, but like, what about you? And he was very good about it. And so I think that it isn't like an act or anything like that. I think it's genuinely who he is and how he approaches things. And it's been really interesting to watch, and it'll be interesting as that gets more attention and he becomes more of a figure in college football at large.
And by the way, that 4-yard run he had was on a 3rd and short for Penn State. So it just feels like everything he's doing matters when he does it, especially when every yard felt to matter. You knew every point was going to matter in Los Angeles, and Tyler Warren did a lot of heavy lifting out there. We wrote a story on Sunday coming out of this game and kind of led off with the fact that he was asked directly about his insane numbers, and everyone's talking about it. And his response to that in postgame, sworn by media, is, yeah, but did you see what Julian Fleming did with those 4th down catches? There's 10 guys out there with me. The running backs are working hard. Drew's making big passes. He didn't mention anything that he actually did in like a 40-second response. And that just, to me, was classic Tyler Warren. Let's go over the defensive player of the game, Jaylen Reed. He's a guy that feels like since this season started at West Virginia, he has been almost Jair Brownish. Like he's where you need him to be at the right time. And I think you picked Jaylen Reed as your defensive MVP in the preseason. You had the 3rd pick, maybe, if I'm correctly recalling this back.
I hope August.
I did. I think you did. Well, we'll check it for midseason on the next episode. But your point was, can he ascend to be that Jair Brown type figure where it doesn't really matter where he's starting the play? He seems to finish a lot of plays, and came up with his 3rd career interception at a crucial moment that halted what felt like USC getting a late field goal opportunity to put the game away as regulation ended. He gave the offense a chance to do something with the football by returning it 22 yards. He had several tackles on the day. And when it comes to Reed, the big stat for me here, 2nd time in 3 games now, going back to that Illinois matchup a couple weeks ago in Happy Valley, where he did not miss a defensive snap. That's a big deal. This guy is staying on the field. He's making a ton of plays. The staff loves him. They love his IQ. And I think he has really answered the call for this defense since KJ Winston has gone down. Dejan Lane didn't play much. He was down to like 2 defensive snaps. It was Jaylen Reed and Zachy Wheatley's show back at safety. I want to see more of him at the line role. We all do. I know James Franklin does. We saw that early. He was fantastic. But it hasn't really mattered. Jaylen Reed is taking his responsibility week by week, and he's thriving.
I think that shows the ascension of him as a player, where that first game, it was, he's at the line. I think that you could have credited scheme a little bit more with the plays that he was making, what he was able to do. And I think that that's sort of how it was presented to us a little bit. Like, we're going to put him here and he's going to be able to do all these different things. Well, he's not there anymore. Like you said, Dejan Lane isn't really playing, but he's still making plays. They're still able to use him in different ways. I think USC, their personnel packages helped with that a little bit, where they spread it out, had a bunch of wide receivers on the field. I looked at the snap counts for the
they're kind of crazy on defense, right? It's kind of crazy on defense.
Well, especially at cornerbacks, where you have Kimber, Harris, Miller, Tracy, and Washington all with at least 28 snaps. And so I think the fact that you were able to put so many defensive backs onto the field at once let you move Reed around a little bit more and have him maybe in a pseudo Lion role. But I think the fact that he's been able to just make these plays and be around the ball. I mean, it seems like every time he rushes the passer too, he's getting home. That he's able to get some of these pressures. It's just been really, really impressive to watch him this year. I think that, he's someone who isn't a team captain on that defense, but you can tell that he is an emotional focal point for them, and that he is someone who sets the tone that other guys really lean on. I think that we hear a lot about his intelligence and how he is as a processor, and you watch him directing traffic out there pre-snap sometimes, and it's just really, really impressive. So I think Reed deserves a ton of credit for elevating his game himself and putting himself, in these different positions and coming through. It's been a ton of fun to watch.
I sat down with Jaylen Reed one-on-one with our partner CBS studios out in Indianapolis that they had set up in the Colts Stadium. This was during Big Ten Media Days, and he straight up said, yes, he felt disrespected last year. He felt overlooked last year. It was an elite-level defense, but I think he got maybe an honorable mention in the conference, and he was a stalwart out there for that defense. I don't think anybody's going to be overlooking Jaylen Reed this time. By the way, he leads all Nittany Lions in tackles at midseason with 39 of those. And I'm glad you mentioned the cornerbacks being so frequently involved. Zion Tracy had 30 snaps, a bunch of those guys over 25 snaps. It was Tony Rojas and Kobe King at linebacker. No one else saw a dozen snaps at linebacker. So this was a drastic shift to that 5 defensive back look with Cam Miller, Zion Tracy getting a ton of work in that Lion nickel position. Dom DeLuca still being very limited defensively in his second game bout of an injury. Tyler Elston getting about 6 snaps, and then really no one else. No Tamir Robinson, no Dakari Nelson. They had a plan. They stuck with it, and that's where it led. It was heavy defensive back. And then special teams, there is zero surprise about who the staff picked for this one. Ryan Barker, 4 converted field goals, none bigger than the walk-off field goal in the first overtime session after USC failed to make their field goal. Barker's the guy that we've heard great things about since he arrived on campus last summer. We saw it with our own eyes, a very rainy evening last August where he looked like the best kicker on the field for Penn State, but ultimately didn't play at all as a freshman. He's going to play a bunch if he keeps playing like this. 6 for 6 on the season now for field goal opportunities, and he's being called cold as ice by his head coach. That's a good thing for job security. And right now, Ryan Barker helps Penn State reach the midseason, and I can't believe we're doing this. But you list the concerns for this team. You're not listing place kicker right now in that top 3 probably. And Ryan Barker's got to do it over and over and over again. But when you come off a performance like that, I'm not pointing to place kicker as something I'm super concerned about for Penn State at this stage. And I thought a few weeks ago, we'd be getting to midseason and saying, will this cost them in the college football playoff or in a Big Ten championship game or trying to make the playoff? And right now, certainly feel less worried about that.
Definitely. I think that you feel really good about Ryan Barker right now and what he's able to bring to this Penn State kicking game. And I think that James Franklin describing him as cold as ice is very apt. I think talking to him after the game, that was my first time interviewing him, and you could see a very quiet confidence about him. And I think that it was very much like, I'm in there, I'm going to kick the ball, I'm going to make it. I think that he felt a little less like talking to like Alex Falcons and Sanders Sahadak. They felt a little more cerebral about things, and I think this kind of goes back a little bit. Reminded me a little bit of Jordan Stout in terms of the I'm going out there and I'm going to kick it. Like, this is my job. Like, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm here for. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And I think that Barker is someone that we're going to see maybe a little bit more of if Penn State is confident, because if you're confident in your kicker, that changes the calculus a little bit when you get into that weird 30 to 45 yard line range and you're trying to figure out if if it's 4 down territory, if you should play for a field goal, if you just want to get points on the board, that sort of thing. And to have someone that you're confident in and is reliable, that can change things a little bit. Same time, we know that this can change week to week. I remember after the Bowling Green game, what we all wrote about the kicking situation. So I think Barker has shown what he can do, but I think more than anything, kicker is the "what have you done for me lately" spot, and lately for him looks pretty good. He was also Big Ten Freshman of the Week He is a redshirt freshman, so he was in there. I thought he would be special teams player of the week, but then I looked at what the Northwestern kicker did, where he did kicking, punting, and kickoffs for Northwestern at Maryland. So I was like, okay, that one makes sense there. I have no issue with that one.
Yeah, Big Ten Freshman of the Week. And just a reminder there that if he keeps rolling this way, he could be this team's kicker for like the next 50 games. I mean, he's got a lot of career ahead of him. And if you can kind of figure things out, a place kicker for that long term, it's a really good spot to be in as a special teams coach and as a head coach. And we'll continue to monitor his development moving forward. Won't have any big kicks this Saturday. And his longest to this point is 40 yards that came against UCLA. So we still got to see a little bit of a test for the range with Ryan Barker, though he told me during the offseason he feels pretty comfortable from about 55 plus. And again, longest to this point is 40. That's all he's needed to do. I want to really quickly go back to what Drew Allar did on Saturday. Daniel, we got a few more minutes before we jump into recruiting with Tyler Calvaruso, talk about a commitment flip and a few other things. But Drew Allar, the style of play we talked about, but the actual production was just very different than what we've seen from Drew Allar at any point in his starting career going back to last September. Look, 17 career start, 30 out of 43. He averaged about 21 passes per game during a 5-0 start. He doubled that on the road against USC, and yet, mentioned this on the postgame podcast, still completes 70% of his passes. On the season, he's over 71% of his passes. Every single game, he has completed at least 65% of his passes. The lowest percentage for him is that opener against West Virginia. He's been right around 70. He's been at 80 at times over the course of this season. But his 391 yards were almost 70 yards more than at any point during his career. We already talked about his willingness to throw into some traffic, to take the lumps after an interception, and then to come back out and still play with aggression. Look, his completion percentage is up 11 points, Daniel, from last year. We're halfway through the season now. He was a 60% passer last year with Mike Yurcich. He's now a 71% passer as a junior with Andy Kotelnicki as his play caller and Danny O'Brien as his quarterbacks coach. And you have to factor in there that on average, his depth of target is about 2 yards further down the field. So there's a little bit more risk involved. Again, we talked about what's going on, above the shoulders for Drew Allar, but the production that you're getting and what he showed he can produce, now you're thinking a little bit differently if you get caught up in a shootout against an Ohio State down the road, or if you're going up against a high-powered offense in the postseason, you can actually start to let yourself imagine, well, Drew Allar can keep up with that.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest takeaway, and it was also it's kind of a quiet 391 yards. I looked at that after the game and I was pretty surprised because he did that without the 60-yard touchdown pass to Omari Evans or those big downfield passes. It was just these chunk plays, 20 yards at a time. I think he had like 5 completions of at least, or I think Warren alone had like 5 catches of 20 yards. Like they were just getting these chunks of yardage, moving the ball downfield, and being efficient with it. I mean, that completion percentage, staying the same while upping, the number of attempts drastically is really, really impressive. I just pulled up Allar's career game logs, and the previous number of passes he'd thrown was 42 at Ohio State last year. He got 191 yards out of that. He threw 39 against Ole Miss, completed less than 50%. The next highest in a win was 37 attempts against Iowa in the whiteout last year. He only got 166 yards off of that. I just think that they're being so much more efficient in the pass game. They're moving the ball better through the air. And, I think that we talk about Drew Allar being the talent that can elevate you and win you a game. We hadn't really seen that. And also Penn State, last year, Mike Yurcich didn't really give him the chance to do that.
Yeah.
In those Ohio State or Michigan games. But for whatever reason, the conditions have changed. Things are a little bit different. And I think now you can say, oh, like Drew Allar can go win you a game. And that's new. It's kind of took until halfway through his second season as a starter to get to that point. But I think now and as you go a little bit further down later on into the season, you saw Ohio State just play a really close game against Oregon on Saturday night. And what they have on offense and what they're capable of. Now you're kind of like, okay, maybe if we want to win a game, we don't have to ugly it up and turn it into just this war of attrition like we saw in those Ohio State and Michigan games last year. Maybe we can be the ones that strike first, that set the tone, are the aggressor. And I think that changes things for a team.
I looked it up. 11 pass completions for Drew Allar on Saturday that went for at least 16 yards over the course of that afternoon in Los Angeles. That's a big total of chunk plays through the air, especially for this quarterback based on his career background to this point. I did want to note it was the Tyler Warren show on offense. He had 20 targets, but I thought outside of a couple untimely drops, the wide receiver group did its part to help keep Penn State afloat, to keep drives moving, especially late. We know what Julian Fleming did with those clutch catches on 4th and longs during the game to try and drive, but you had Harrison Wallace. He had his highest receiving total since week 1. He's got at least 3 catches every week. You had Liam Clifford playing a career high in snaps, getting a few catches. He's a 1 game removed from 100 yards. Omari Evans, just a 16-yard catch. But now when you put him on the field, every defensive coordinator has to account for his speed because of what they produced. And I just think that, again, when you're looking at things that maybe surprise you a little bit at midseason, when it comes to that top 4 wide receiver group, do they have a wide receiver 1? I wouldn't call anybody that right now. They have a Tyler Warren. That works pretty well. But that 4 is working for them. It's giving them what they need for the most part. And I think if they can build off of this, the confidence should be pretty high in that receiver room right now. They can build off of that in the second half. They're in a really good spot for Drew Allar being confident, not just in his own abilities, but in the abilities of those around him. And I know it's been a relatively quiet couple of games for Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, even factoring in that they both reached the end zone and Singleton got the game-time score. But those rushing numbers have been well below where we saw. I think they were over 200 rushing yards the first 4 games. They've been under 120 the last couple games, somewhere in that ballpark. But again, Drew Allar is answering a lot of questions amidst that, and so are some of these pass targets, I think. Just wanted to finish out on a defensive note before we close out with Penn State's number 3 ranking and what you think of that. But they lean on a lot of veterans. We talked about that. It was really across the field. Abdul Carter, Denai Dennis-Sutton, Zane Durant, Devon J. Thomas were playing a lot more than their backups, a lot more than we'd seen through the first 5 games. You only really relied on 2 linebackers with consistency in Kobe King and Tony Rojas. You loaded up those 2 veteran safeties without bringing Dejon Lane into the mix as a freshman. And, it was an uneven performance, but it's another performance where you can say Tom Allen's bunch certainly finished stronger than they started and came up with some key plays along the way. And USC's offensive attack, I thought, I didn't fully watch all 60 minutes of their first 5 matchups, but I'd imagine that's one of the more complete performances they've put together as an offense. And still you're able to get enough from this defense, come up with some situational performances, especially after those Allar interceptions where, you want improvements, you need improvements, but I really think that, again, they answered the moment in some key spots.
When you talk about the playing time distribution and leaning on all of those starters, I think it reminds me of what you talk about in terms of basketball, where you get into the postseason and suddenly the rotation shortens up and you just focus on, X number of guys. And I think we talked about it earlier this year when they were playing so many different defenders and doing all of these rotations. It was like, okay, what's it going to look like in a big game? What is it going to look like when it's push comes to shove? And I think we saw that they're going to lean on those starters. They're going to lean on the proven guys. But at the same time, it's a long season. So when they get the chance to, they're going to rotate through, do their best to keep those guys fresh so that when you get to a big game like this, you can really empty the tank with some of those guys. But I'm going to be really curious on Wednesday when we talk to the coordinators to hear from Tom Allen and to get some perspective on what we're seeing on Saturdays, what we're seeing from the first half to the second half, and why that might be sort of the factors, like what are we not seeing, what do we not know that gets us to this point. But I come away impressed with it. You've gotten the timely plays, you've gotten those, stepping up in big moments, and I think that you should feel pretty good about where this defense is as we move forward.
Daniel, Penn State's up to number 3. Ohio State fell a bit because they lost that game out at Oregon. Oregon number 2, and then Texas remains in the top spot in these rankings. But look, Penn State's going to take a week off. One thing that means is rest. The other is you can avoid a loss, and so they'll have some staying power in that top group of college football. When you look at where the Big Ten is right now, when you look at where this 12-team playoff tournament is right now, the projections at midseason continue to point toward Penn State at least hosting a first-round game in Beaver Stadium the weekend before Christmas. Is that now officially kind of viewed as the, kind of the floor for this team because of being 6-0? I know I kind of asked you this before in the post game, but do you think that if they don't end up at least hosting a first-round playoff game, that the second half of the season will be qualified as perhaps a little underwhelming? Or do you think there's still wiggle room for them to maybe pick up a second loss and that to be okay?
It's interesting, especially because this is so new to all of us and you have so many different factors. I think that we're getting to the point in the schedule where maybe you start to see the SEC teams cannibalize themselves a little bit. And I think that you saw that in the Big Ten where you finally had Ohio State and Oregon play, two of the top teams. You're going to have Oregon, you're going to have Ohio State and Penn State play, Oregon and Michigan play. You're going to start to, I think things will start to shake out a little bit more. They might start to get a little bit more confusing because of the different losses and different resumes. But yeah, I mean, I think Penn State has themselves in position to be in that 5 to 8 range and host a playoff game. The difference between the number 8 team and the number 5 team, I'm really curious to see what that is. If there is a huge gulf, or if it's one of those things where you could put 5 to 8 in any order and you would say, oh yeah, that makes sense. But I do think that Penn State is in a really good position. I'm going to go through a little bit later today and get these projections together and try to see what the big picture is right now. But if you talk about wanting to be one of the best 12 teams in the country come December, being number 3 right now in the middle of October is a good spot. But I do think that you have to finish strong. You have to avoid these different letdowns. And yeah, I mean, I think the schedule is a little tricky when you talk about having to go to Wisconsin at night. You have Ohio State. You have that road trip to Minnesota. I don't think I would be too worried about Purdue or Maryland right now. But yeah, and Washington comes to town. They've been a little up and down too. So I think some of these teams, you don't really know what you're going to get in the second half of the season. So it becomes even more incumbent on you to take care of business, play your game, set the tone, and really go from there. But yeah, I think that, that weekend in December, the pencil mark becomes a little bit darker on your calendar.
And so Wisconsin is next on the radar. They've got Northwestern this week on the road, and then they will host Penn State for what has been announced as of Monday as a 7:30 kickoff. So you're looking at a primetime matchup again in the Big Ten for Penn State, and that's a Wisconsin team that's won a couple games in a row, blowing out Rutgers, blowing out Purdue after back-to-back losses at USC and against Alabama. Just looking at the Big Ten standings real quick, you've got Oregon at number 2 unbeaten, Penn State at number 3 unbeaten, but also the Indiana Hoosiers, unbeaten, number 16 in the country. They got more points scored than anybody in the conference. They got about 200 more points total than their opponents midseason. They've been a real pleasant surprise, but some of those one-loss teams in the mix as well, including the team that Penn State recently played, number 22 Illinois, and Ohio State. They'll be in town November 2nd. We all know what that matchup means for the Nittany Lions. Daniel, we're going to try to get together for a second episode this week, and we'll break down some more mid-season conversation, where things stand for the Nittany Lions through 6, where we think they could stand after the next 6 matchups. But we'll do that a little bit later in the week. In the meantime, enjoy that nice heat in the Arizona desert. We'll be here enjoying fall in Happy Valley.
Thanks, Tyler.
Let's jump into some recruiting conversation now with Tyler Calvaruso, our resident recruiting insider at Lions247.com. Tyler, welcome back on board.
Thanks for having me, man. It feels good. We're here at the bye week, but still a lot going on.
Yeah, we've got a lot to catch up with you on, and it's got to start with the completed commitment flip. It felt like it wasn't one of those in one fell swoop flips, but it was one that over the course of a couple of weeks occurred for the Nittany Lions. They got Josh Johnson to campus for a home game. He ultimately got off his Louisville commitment, which he had been on since the summer. And then on Monday, he announces that he is indeed joining the Nittany Lions 2025 recruiting class. Tell us how this came to fruition and why Josh Johnson out of Ironton, Ohio, remained a key target for the Nittany Lions even after he committed to Louisville.
Yeah, it wasn't one of those quick flips that you see where you go from one school to another in an instant. This was a little bit slower of a burn, but still within a span of 2 weeks, Johnson visits for the UCLA game, which again, just for those who might not be so in tune to recruiting in season, just the lull that Penn State has in home games this month with UCLA being the only opportunity for the staff to host recruits inside Beaver Stadium getting top targets, not just underclassmen, but flip targets back to campus for that game was so important. And getting Josh Johnson to State College for that game was a big reason why this one was able to come together on this specific timeline, because you don't know where his recruitment would have been come November. You don't know what other programs might have potentially gotten involved down the road. You don't know where things would have stood with Louisville a month from now. So getting Johnson to campus for that UCLA game was pivotal. Again, 2-week span. He visits, backs off the Louisville commitment. Now he's part of that Penn State class. Penn State felt good about its chances with Johnson going back to June. That Louisville commitment came as a surprise to a lot of people inside of Lash. And then once things started to move around with Antonio Branch a little bit, when you got the sense that he might be looking elsewhere and he ultimately flips to Colorado, contact with Johnson remained, and he was receptive, which was a nice – that I don't want to say a pleasant surprise given the progress that Penn State had made with Johnson leading up to his original Louisville commitment. But the fact that he was still receptive and invited back and accepted the invitation to attend that UCLA game, that was important. That gave Penn State the idea that they could pull this one off, and it came together. And there's a lot of excitement about this get. I know the rankings aren't exactly the highest on Johnson on our end, or really in the composite. I believe he's the number 920 recruit in the 2025 class, but Penn State is bullish on his potential. Versatile DB, can give you reps at corner, can give you reps at safety. One of those guys who you look at him, you look at his frame, you see what he does well, maybe even a potential fit in that Lion role in Tom Allen's defense at some point down the road. Again, the testing numbers are where they need to be for Penn State to feel good about this, and really, there's just a lot of the consensus is that this is a high-quality addition to the secondary.
A lot more analysis over at Lions247.com about the addition of Johnson, who's 6'2" plus in the defensive backfield. I think you like the odds of him landing at 200 pounds as a freshman as he gets into a college strength program. So he's a member of this 2025 class. We're just 2 months away from seeing this group finalize their plans. And then a few weeks after that, a bunch of them are going to be here as early enrolled freshmen come January 2025. But we've still got more flip candidates to monitor. This is, by my count, the third commitment flip for Penn State in recent months. Cameron Smith, of course, from Duke's class. He's a 4-star linebacker out of St. Joe's Prep in Philly. And then Matthew Outen, flipping from Virginia Tech. He's a 4-star wide receiver who, by the way, in his most recent game last weekend had 4 touchdowns and over 300 total yards. He's looking pretty good. And now you got a third flip on board, but there are other names out there. Who are the top of the priority list commitment targets that we need to be checking in on for the next 8-9 weeks?
Before getting into that, just since you brought up Outen, I just want to go on record and say I truly think at this point, just looking at the athletic makeup and what he does on the field, I think he's got a chance to be the best prospect in this class when it's all said and done. I felt that way the first go around when we got the feeling that he was really, really high on that wide receiver board. And then he lands on the freaks list that we do, that Andrew Ivins and the team at 24/7 put together. And you look at the testing numbers, the track, everything that has gone into his evaluation. Now you're seeing what he's doing as a senior. I think he has a real chance to be the best prospect in this 25 class. But back to the flip targets, which is where most of the energy is being dedicated at this point late in the cycle. That early signing period, it begins December 4th. So we're inching closer to it. Penn State working hard to round out that class with some potential quality additions. And a lot of its flip efforts, they center around prospects in the Keystone State, some of the top prospects within the state. Penn State, goes without saying, those guys are a priority. Want to keep them in town, get them to State College, and help them call Penn State home at the next level. They're doing that with Lex Cyrus, South Carolina wide receiver commit, 4-star prospect. Penn State's been high on for a long time. He was at that UCLA game. Penn State's working to get him back to campus again for one of those marquee fall matchups against Ohio State, possibly the wideout, possibly if it works. We'll see what comes about on that front. If Cyrus pops up on campus again, I think that speaks volumes. I think he's giving Penn State a really legitimate look at this point in the cycle. And you also have to factor in what South Carolina is doing with its own wide receiver haul. They're adding a bunch of quality prospects to that 25 class. The group is bigger than it was when Cyrus committed during the summer. That's not to say he's going to fall victim to a numbers game at South Carolina or necessarily look elsewhere because a lot of other receivers are entering the fold. But just to reiterate really what we've been saying, there were people the first go around that want to see Cyrus at Penn State. That remains in place. That sentiment remains in place. And Cyrus has been receptive. Not the only Keystone State pass catcher on the radar. Top 100 tight end commit Andrew Olish, Michigan tight end commit, excuse me. He, hasn't shut things down.
Do we think that Andy Kotelnicki, James Franklin, and Ty Howell made sure he got the highlights of Tyler Warren from last Saturday?
That and the fact that Luke Reynolds is seeing the field early, I think Penn State has a hell of a lot to sell at the tight end position right now, probably more than any other position, to be completely honest. I mean, Tyler Warren's in the midst of a special season. You're seeing the utilization of tight ends in Andy Kotelnicki's offense. And then you could look at a former 5-star Reynolds getting on the field early. So the depth chart's kind of flush with opportunities. And the utilization, you're seeing all the ways you could thrive in an Andy Kotelnicki offense. If you're a tight end like Andrew Olish, a high-level tight end prospect, it's hard not to be, at the very least, interested in what the Nittany Lions have going on. And they've continued to fight.
Tyler Warren will be taking a lot of snaps with him to the NFL.
Oh, yeah.
There's going to be a lot of snaps to fill next year. I was interested if you would bring up Olish, because it wasn't a guy that we had focused much on the flip front in recent months, it felt like, but he was so impressive on the camp circuit. Clearly looked like a top of the line tight end target for a team that's used to reeling them in. And so the fact that you're circling back to him now in mid-October made my ears perk a little bit.
Yeah, and Penn State loves Matt Henderson. It's tight end commit in this class right now. They're so excited about his athletic upside and what he's doing down in Virginia his senior season. But you always want to stockpile talent. Olish is an elite talent, in my opinion. I think the rankings reflect that. Right in Penn State's own backyard. And they haven't stopped recruiting him, and he hasn't shut them down. He popped up at Alabama for a visit for when they hosted Georgia. He's been back to Michigan this season. He was actually at Michigan when the Wolverines knocked off USC in September. Penn State, again, kind of like Cyrus, where if you could get him back to campus, it speaks volumes. Keeping an eye on the whiteout as a potential visit date for that. Really, any of those marquee November matchups, that's the target, obviously, at this point. That's kind of your only opportunity, really, before the beginning of the early signing period. So we're keeping a very close eye on what comes about on that front. Same deal with Brandon Finney on the defense side of the ball, top 100 Oregon cornerback commit out of McDonough in Maryland. Penn State, we're going to get him back to campus after he visited for the UCLA game. That one's going to be tough, man. He still's got to make it to Michigan for an official visit there. He's already been to Michigan this fall, so that's going to be 2 trips to Ann Arbor before he comes to a final decision. Was just at Oregon for that. I mean, that had to be a hell of an experience for him out there in Eugene for that Ohio State game. So it's tough, but Penn State's still in the mix, and they're going to keep fighting. Remember, that relationship with Terry Smith is in a good place. Those two are very comfortable, very familiar, and that should help the Nittany Lions down the stretch. And then with Bradley Gompers, the 4-star linebacker commit to Duke out of Central Catholic in Pittsburgh. Logic, you think Penn State has a really good chance there, and I do think that Penn State feels maybe optimistic, I think is a good way to put it, about his chances. But again, he does have a very strong affinity with Duke, and Manny Diaz was just out to see him over the weekend. He watched Central Catholic play. He was on the sidelines, and Duke's not going to go down without a fight there. There's a lot of comfort with that staff, the defensive scheme fit, given Diaz his time. Gompers and Diaz go back all the way to when Diaz was at Penn State. So it's not an easy pursuit for Penn State, but it's one that they're still fighting. And another one they're still fighting is top 24 edge rusher Zahir Mathis, the Ohio State commit. He's going to be back in Columbus for his official visit with the Buckeyes coming up beginning October 26th. It's a chance for the Buckeyes to squash things maybe. Remember, Mathis made it to Penn State twice during the summer, still working to get him back to town. But that Ohio State visit, the outcome of that, it's going to be interesting to monitor.
Yeah, we will be tracking a bunch of those names. I know you will, specifically over at Lions247.com and in the weeks and a couple months ahead as Penn State finalizes its 2025 class. Tyler, I wanted to finish here with a couple more commits that you wanted to spotlight. One on defense, one on offense. We already mentioned Matthew Outen and his big performance. I'm going to have highlights up from that at Lions247.com a little later on Tuesday. But we got a quarterback you wanted to get into and also a defensive back.
Yeah, you got to start under center. Can never talk enough about quarterbacks. And Beckham Kritz has been a hot topic of conversation throughout this 25 cycle. Miami Central, things did not go as planned for him. He was its week 1 starter. They lost to Lakeland High. It was a very good Florida public school program, just like Miami Central. He gave way to Anthony McQueen, who provided a little bit more of a running threat. Kritz was relegated to a reserve role. Wanted to get back on the field. Made the move over to fellow Florida power Chaminade Madonna, which is also home to Penn State wide receiver commit Kobe Howard. Those two have been friends for actually a while. Kritza pushed to get Howard in the class behind the scenes while Howard was going through his recruitment leading up to his August commitment. So those two are reunited at Chaminade Madonna. And Kritza was, after making the move a couple weeks ago, Kritza made his debut against a very good St. Thomas Aquinas team out of Fort Lauderdale. They were ranked number 13 in the nation going into that matchup, and Kritza helped to orchestrate an upset win. Chaminade Madonna, they leaned pretty heavily on their run game, and that they've got a 5-star tailback in Derek Cooper in the 26 class. Penn State did on him. He's an elite prospect. They've got a Middle Tennessee commit, Kalen Hall, if I'm calling his name correctly. They combined for almost 300 rushing yards, 296 yards on the ground, a couple of scores. Hall had the game-winning score out of the Wildcat. Kritza's final line, 16 of 23, according to Max Prep, 16 of 23, 121 yards, an interception in the second quarter that, quite frankly, if you look at the tape, wasn't the best decision. But I keep going to the fact that really what we've said about Kritza throughout this cycle, it's important that he takes reps. I know the box score, that final line, doesn't inspire a ton of confidence for some Penn State fans who just read that and see the performance, but he needs the reps. He's getting them now at Chaminade Madonna. He's going to be under center for its final 2 regular season affairs before diving into the postseason. And they're going to have a real chance to bring home some hardware. Kritz is going to be an important part of that. And we'll be monitoring his progress, really, really closely. Because, again, right now he's the lone guy at quarterback in that 25 class. Feelers remain out elsewhere at the position, in the right scenario with the right fit. I guess there's a potential for, another addition. We'll see how things come about on that front the remainder of the fall. But Kritz is the guy, and he's back under center, and that's really big for his development. He needs the reps, and he's doing it against high-level competition, which going into the year, we thought that was going to be a big plus for him playing at Miami Central, playing a difficult schedule. He's doing it now at Chaminade Madonna. So it all came together in a sense in that regard. And if you're Penn State, again, the feedback we continue to get is that, he has the tools. He just needs to be developed. And getting back on the field, that's a step in the right direction. And then flipping over to the other side of the ball, you mentioned Matthew Outen, big performance. Xavier Thomas at Central Catholic over the weekend. 3 touchdowns. It's just impact player on defense, special teams. He's returning kicks to the house. He's not talked about a whole lot compared to some of the other 25 commits, but man, Penn State, I think they're getting a player. I know internally they think they're getting a player.
Yeah, Thomas had, I believe, touchdown as a receiver, as a defensive back returning interception, and as a return man on special teams. All 3 phases.
He's been doing it all year too, man. It's nothing new for him. It's like every week he's doing something in all 3 facets.
And Penn State will always be keeping a close eye on that Central Catholic team because not only do they have the commit there, but they have Bradley Gompers, who you just referenced at linebacker, a really compelling talent for that class in the senior group as well. Tyler, really appreciate it. We could have gone down a lot more paths here, but we're running short on time. There's always more recruiting coverage over at Lions247.com for people to check out. What is Penn State doing during the bye week? Where are their coaches going to head? That will be answered on the site over the course of this week because bye weeks are a really nice opportunity for the staff to get out and about, get face-to-face with some players, get mid-season evaluations, and I'm sure we'll be learning some new things from those travels. So appreciate your coverage at the site, Tyler. Appreciate hopping on the podcast to talk recruiting with us.
Thanks, man. It's a bye week on the field. It's never a bye week off the field. Recruiting's always rolling, so thanks for having me back.
That's right. All right, talk to you soon. Just like Tyler said, not quite a bye week for us here at Lions247.com. We have a ton more coverage coming your way over the course of this week. As I said, Tuesday this time on a bye week, we're going to be out of the Penn State practice field. We'll get a look at the Nittany Lions over at team facilities, followed up by some questions to James Franklin. And then on Wednesday, defensive coordinator Tom Allen, offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki will step up to the microphones. We'll have a chance to pick their brains a little bit for the first time since before this season started. So there's a lot to catch up on there. And then we'll have a second episode of this bye week a little later on in the week, expecting to drop that one on Thursday, breaking down some mid-season conversation, more big picture stuff versus looking back at the USC game and what we anticipate from the second half of this Penn State football season. For now, stepping aside on behalf of Tyler Calvaruso, Daniel Gallen, and everybody else over at Lions247.com, I'm Tyler Donahue. We'll talk to you real soon right here on the Lions 24/7 podcast.